Muy buenas a todos. Hoy tenemos una entrevista de 30 minutos con el jefazo de Valorant, el Game Director de Valorant. Se llama Joe Ziegler, ahora mismo vive en Los Ángeles y se ha tomado el tiempo para poder responder durante 30 minutos todas las preguntas que tenía. Tenéis todo el vídeo subtitulado en español. Dejadme en los comentarios qué opináis de lo que dice y si tenéis alguna otra pregunta que le podamos hacer a cualquier persona que trabaje en Riot, que están muy abiertos a hablar conmigo y lo podemos utilizar para hacer contenido y que pueda yo ayudaros a vosotros a resolver muchas dudas gracias a ellos. Todos a ver la entrevista y como he dicho antes, dejadme en los comentarios lo que opináis sobre lo que dice y si tenéis alguna pregunta también la podéis dejar debajo. Vamos a la entrevista.
You make me all blind with your civil rights. You demand that I eternize your name. Walk ahead to stop and obey.
So the first ones are people want to know if you guys are going to do more cinematics and more lore about the game because there's been some lore out already, but not too much, and people really like the cinematics and all about that, and people want more. Do you have something to say about it?
Yeah, so we're definitely working on some things that'll be pretty delightful for people who are looking for more story and lore. I can't tell you exactly the pieces, but there's definitely stuff coming in 2021 that'll sort of help to flesh out things a little bit more and sort of give a little bit more excitement to to the world that we're creating. A lot of our lore approach, honestly, is to sort of not try to shove too much in your face, sort of but it is to actually try to give you little tidbits everywhere. So what we've been doing recently is we've been sort of inserting a lot of like things inside of the game that when you take a step back, you'll be able to see a little bit more of the story. Like if you start plugging pieces together a little bit more, but aren't really about like necessarily showing you a bunch of things that are happening in the world. We will have a few things that'll do that, like for example, cinematics as we're moving into 2021. But really, if you want to follow the story of Valorant, a lot of it's there. You kind of have to hunt for it and put it together yourself. And it's a little bit of like that kind of treasure hunt, if you will.
Why do you think that Valorant as a shooter is succeeding, and what makes it different?
There's a few things that I think are making Valorant succeed at the current time. I think right now there's sort of two sort of major directions in gaming. One direction is to sort of think about how do we drive competition and sort of team competition to the forefront, really set up a stage where people can really excel and go deep. And the other side is sort of how do we create more novel experiences for a lot of players to come together that aren't necessarily competitive, but really drive towards the idea of being a social team, things of that sort. I think Valorant tries to do a lot of the competitive and some of the social part, to bring players together around an idea of seeing competition and working together coordinatedly in a very fascinating way. And I really honestly do think that one of the strengths of Valorant is that it challenges you, like it challenges you in a way that a lot of games don't. It challenges you to sort of think while acting, if that makes sense, think while you're sort of develop a plan and sort of execute on that, as opposed to a lot of games where I think you're really forced to just react. Like if you think about a game like Overwatch, I think Overwatch is really fun, but I think Overwatch in a lot of ways is for players who really like to react to a scenario. They like to see something and then sort of be able to target it and then fire at it. Whereas I think in our game, it's a lot more about thinking through the situation in your head before it occurs, then making it happen, And in a lot of ways, I think there's something gratifying about both sides of that. But I think for our game, that's real. Our players are sort of more interested in that space. I also think part of it is that we're sort of bringing ourselves out of that. Games in the tactical space typically have been very military oriented, and I think we're sort of bringing ourselves out of that military space to really be a little bit more focused on how do we get really creative gameplay out of not being a very militaristic game, if that makes sense. Because I think typically you'd be constrained to we have grenades and these kinds of things, but I think for us, because we're able to lift ourselves out of the military space, we're also able to go, what kind of crazy tactical scenarios can we create out of giant lasers or fireballs or things like that actually I think help to add creative scenarios to your toolkit when you're creating new strategies, doing tactics inside of our game.
The replays, when are the replays coming? It's something really important because for us as pro players and even people that want to learn more, it's a tool that we really need, and I want to know when are they coming.
So we were actually recently talking about this when we were doing planning, and we're looking at some point, like I can't say exactly where because we don't know exactly when it's going to land, but sometime as we're going into 2021, we have it marked on our roadmap. We want to do replays, but it's more of a question of like sort of what shape or form it takes, because replays can have a lot of different sort of features attached to it. But we do know that we want replays for a variety of reasons. One of which is actually to let pro teams be able to review their work, review the round, and actually be able to analyze what they did wrong, what they did right, especially when they're doing a set play. How did they go? How did it land? How did it effectively happen? And so that it's definitely on our backlog,
Another thing about the replays, if you're looking into that, there's a lot of movie makers that told me that if you can add some tools for them to be able to create movies that are nice, I don't know what exactly they want, but maybe you can figure it out yourself. Maybe, I don't know, if you compare it to CSGO, you can slow down what's happening and you can move the camera. I don't know exactly what they want, but I can guess a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I think another customer for like replays when we're looking at it, or another person who's really going to want it, is third-party content creators who are really making those kinds of like movies or those highlight reels or things of that sort. And honestly, what's really funny is those same tools are things that even our marketing team wants to be able to create those reels and create those things that are happening. So we're looking at it from a lot of different angles of how do we create the right tools that both let you do replays in the traditional sense of reviewing plays, but also let you kind of use it as a creative tool as well.
I think that would solve the Russian problem. I don't know what's happening with the Russian problem. I think that if you have replays with the voices, that would solve the problem. I don't know what's happening because I get tilted sometimes because they cannot speak in game, and in really high levels, not being able to hear a comm is dying. And I don't know what's happening with that, but if you can tell us something about it or what's going on.
I think we totally recognize that. So that's the difficulty right now, with having no voice supported in Russia, and also having, a lot of those cross server scenarios occur where, you have players from Russia playing with players from Europe, across Europe, and especially at high level, especially at your level, let me put it that way, where I think voice comms is extremely important in terms of actually being able to transfer that information really quickly. We're looking at some of those scenarios to try to figure out exactly how we'd solve them. It's a complex, intricate problem, but it really boils down to how do you communicate effectively across the scenario? Can you even communicate effectively across the scenario? Do you have the tools to do it? Things like that. And then also, do we need to sort of think about, even at a higher level, whether or not matchmaking has to take into account, voice comms or language or things of that sort, So there's like a lot of sort of different solutions we're trying to figure out for it, but we totally feel the pain, of the scenario that you're in. And we're just trying to find the right solution that makes the most sense across the board right now. If we could, we would totally do it. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's enough. I just want to hear that. The patches always come first in NA, and I know why, because you're based in LA, and it's easier for you to get to do it in NA first, then America first, and then Europe, and then you do one by one. But lately the patches have been have had issues, and you had to revert the patch and go over it. And the question is, how do you test the patches before they go, and what how hard it is to find the bugs before you release them?
It's actually quite hard in a weird way. How we test it is basically we have a series of changes that come into what we call a build, a test branch of a build, and then that branch is basically the thing that we end up releasing. We have a series of vendors and a series of internal testers that actually go through that build and do a lot of different tests to make sure that things are working correctly. Some things only really occur on a live environment, and it's because the live environment is configured slightly differently than an internal environment. Also, some things are only seeable at scale, because imagine that we have like 100 people that help us test the game. It's nothing compared to having millions of people who help us test who help us test the game. And so some of the things they find are really specific to scenarios that we would actually not be able to catch super easily, because they have to do with specific moments that occur. In some cases, it's honestly, like you're saying, it's a mistake. We just don't catch it. In some cases, it's hard to catch it because it's so rare and only happens in a volume of millions of people who are playing it. When that happens and we think just even the chance of it occurring is really bad, we still want to fix it, because really, honestly, one of the big things that happens with the last patch, which the previous patch that occurred earlier this week, is that It went out with a lot more, obviously, a lot more bugs than we really wanted it to, and we would have normally rolled it and continued to fix it on live, but it was in the middle of the qualifiers, and we don't want to mess up the qualifiers while we're trying to fix it. We want to make sure that the qualifiers stay solid while we're trying to fix the patch. So we rolled it back more than anything else. I mean, honestly, like one of the biggest difficulties is technology is really hard. Like technology, like a game is a lot more moving parts than most people realize. Not just the sort of game you're looking at, but also the way it works on the server, the way it works under the network condition that you're in, the way it works on the hardware that you're on. Is all of those factors consider all into one piece. So while we're looking at it, there's probably about 2,000 different setups that you could look at just amongst people who are playing live. And some of those setups mixed with some of the network conditions, environments, mixed with some of the build issues, can all come together to make a really terrible thing. And so as we're testing all of it, we try to catch as much as possible. But when we send it live, sometimes there's unknown factors that we just can't predict. But one of the nice things though is once it goes live and some of those things happen, we're able to fold some of that information back and find new ways to detect it before it goes live. So it's a kind of a learning process as we're going back and forth.
You get better at it. Yeah,
exactly.
That's a good thing. Do you think you can implement the shooting range while you're in queue? Because sometimes the queues take really a long time, and when you're streaming, for example, people don't want to wait watching you in queue, or you know what I mean? You get cold, you cannot warm up. Is that possible?
Yeah, so like actually, it's one of the things we wanted to do originally before we even like for the first version of Valorant that we were sending out in June, but we just ran out of time and focus because there's so many other things to solve. It's definitely something that we're looking at eventually bringing back. We just don't even know exactly when. But for example, doing things while you're queued, especially for someone at your skill level where your queue times are going to be longer because your matchmaking pool is so small, is something that we would definitely want to tackle so that you can stay warm. Or you can go play even like deathmatch or something like that instead of just playing shooting range if you want to. Things like that, sort of those options that allow you to do something while you're in queue.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Okay, there's more things that I have about ranked. Ranked, I see that there's much more Radiant players now, and that it's, I think, easier to get higher rank than before. I am not sure because I don't have the exact explanation, but is that true, and why?
Actually, I think it's less. Actually, when we actually look mathematically, there's actually less Radiant players now, I think, than there were before. We actually clamped it at a certain amount. I don't know if that change has gone in yet, but we're clamping it at a certain amount. And it's with sort of the introduction of where we're looking at for leaderboards that are coming in 2021. The leaderboards change is really focused on the idea of how do we get like a certain set amount of people with the prestige of having Radiant, and making sure that that's a curated list that's really good. So with that change, as we're sort of migrating into it, we're actually making less people Radiant, and there's probably going to be more of those are probably going to be falling into the Immortal rank. So hopefully it's the opposite of what you're seeing right now.
Okay.
Right now, you might just be seeing a result of the transition of where we're going with that. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I'm wrong. And I just saw a lot of people that I've never seen before in Radiant, and I thought, what is going on? And why is the queue so short? Because before it was like 50 minutes or something, or 30, and now it's if I'm playing alone, it's like 3 minutes, which is
That's
much better.
some of that also because we've actually begun navigating. There's probably more people playing solo now instead of Radiant space as opposed to grouped. And when we have more people playing solo or in duos and in the space of like Radiant and Immortal, you really will see much faster matches. If everyone's playing in fives, it'll probably be a little bit slower because it's just gonna have people matching it.
Yeah, that makes sense. The agent balance. You guys are taking the approach, or that's what I think. You can explain it to me after, but you guys are taking the approach of statistics of ranked and how the agent is doing in ranked. Or at least that's what I think you've done with Breach, and that's why he's getting buffed again in the 1.11 patch. I think in competitive play, Breach is really strong, but I see why you're also buffing him, because he has really bad stats in solo queue. Will you keep doing the balance that way, or are you gonna look more into the professional matches?
I think actually we are looking at professional matches as well. So honestly, when we look at Breach, we're looking at the same point of view as you, where Breach is like a super strong pick when it comes to professional play. Like his kit is extremely powerful in terms of being able to shut down, to enable, to do a bunch of stuff to clear a room, even just to clear like basically to flash an entire team pretty effectively.
Yeah.
But you know, there is obviously, like you're pointing out, there's a difference between like, you know, general play and then high level professional play. And so what we're looking at is how do we keep this, or actually make sure he stays balanced at this, because he may not even be really balanced at the professional level. We might actually need to find a way to regulate him there while making him more effective at general play. And I think that's what we're trying to do with some of the balance changes as we're going into it. If we were just buffing him, we'd be frightened out of our minds, because, you know, buffing Breach sounds scary to us when we're looking at competitive balance, you know? So there's a few characters who are like that, right? Like buffing Cypher to us also sounds really scary if we ever do it, you know, for competitive play for that reason. So I think we're definitely taking both those into account when we're looking to do this. We might do some changes that might inadvertently affect competitive, but we'll be watching it super carefully to pull it back if anything bad happens. Yeah.
Nice. I understand your point of view, of course. I think the player base is much wider for the casual players as well, and I said I talk like if I'm in Riot. I don't know why. You should take care of them, and also take care of us, but they are the most important part. I also think.
Both are important. I mean, to us, like, we definitely never want to do anything that just sort of violates the competitive scene. I think the competitive scene is where we start our balanced thoughts. It's because, like, when you look at everything, you really want to balance from the max potential anything can reach back towards the general, like, sort of play pool, right? Because if you don't do that, then you end up with a weird scenario where if everything's based on the perception of the general play pool, you end up with a really messy, like, competitive balance where everything's sort of like rooted off of that piece. So it is really important that we keep both sides healthy. And I think frequently when we start balanced conversations, we start from what does it feel like at the top, and then how do we work it back to the general populace.
Yeah. You mentioned the leaderboard. The leaderboard is coming in 2021. That's something I'm looking forward to. If you want to say something about it, I think you've mentioned everything, but
sure. Yeah, I think right now the team's actually actively working on some of the leaderboards. So the competitive team is right now, and they're working pretty hard on it. They want to bring it into the game so that you have an active leaderboard in the game, so you can actually see the progress of your rank as you're going through Radiant and Immortal. One of the things we regret in sort of season 1 is not having a leaderboard, because once you hit Radiant, it was really hard to tell where you sat in Radiant. And we really wanted to make that better, because if you're climbing that high, or if you're climbing into Immortal, it should be about where you sit, not necessarily just about having a badge that says Immortal, because you're sitting amongst the best in the world. And so we want to make that better. Yeah. And it's coming. It's just we're working on it. Hopefully it'll be here sooner than later. Yeah.
I think that actually will help a lot in the professional scene, because you will see people that you don't know that are really high up in the rankings, and you might want to try them out as well. So you give opportunities for the new upcoming players as well. How many maps are you planning to have on the competitive?
We haven't really determined yet, because we don't have enough. Right now, we'll be the first to admit it. Right now, with releasing our 5th map, you know, we have I think enough to run a BO5, but we don't have enough for some sort of level of strategic positioning of how many we have past that. We're trying to accelerate the next few maps, because we feel like getting to 7 is a good starting point to now begin to think how many of these would we want to carry into a competitive map pool. And then once we get past that, we can begin really thinking if we're going to leave maps out of the competitive map pool, if that makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
And so right now we're sort of thinking about how do we get to the point of having, you know, about 7 to start off that conversation.
I don't know if you've seen that in Japan and some other in Korea as well. They have tournaments where they're ban agents. I don't know if you guys are planning on having that in the future, but it's really interesting, because in NA and Europe we don't do that. And when I see it, they play a completely different game, because if there's no Cypher, for example, which is peaked more than 90% of the games, you don't even know what's going on anymore. So
yeah, totally.
I don't know if that's going to be a thing in the future when we have more agents or something.
I think right now we're not doing that, but I think in the future we may think about it. It really depends on how much it adds to the game versus subtracts from the game, right? Like, is it more interesting to keep 0 bans and really have everybody think about who the other side is picking and who we want to pick to counter that, or who we want to pick to think about how to restrict that? Or is it better to think about how do we restrict the overall pool and make it so players have to adapt to the scenarios that they're in, you know, basically from their meta choices? those decisions I think are really hard to tell when we only have like 14 characters in the game. But as we're sort of going into the future, definitely as we get more characters, it's definitely going to be one of those conversation points where it's like, should we put in banning? Should we put in the way for teams to really influence one another? You know. Having said that, though, I think we're learning a lot from how they handle it right now in some of the Asian tournaments. So we're always thinking about new ways to, like, you know, I was trying to learn from those things to think about new ways to handle the scenes. So.
What's your favorite agent?
Oh man. So it's funny because I've actually been asked this at different points in the past, like in the past 5 months as we're sort of releasing this game. And I would say my favorite agent to watch is usually Omen, because usually the people who are playing Omen are thinking like 2000 IQ. You know, they're going very galaxy brain and going out there, and what they're thinking is in 3D around the map. You know, they're thinking about how do I handle everything that's occurring in safe space. My favorite agent personally, when I look at personally to play, I like Breach, oddly enough. You know, it doesn't mean I'm biased on that front. Like, you know, I still think we should actually figure out how to make a but actually I played Breach for a while. I think part of it is just because I really like the sort of tactical play setup that he has, where he's really able to think, okay, how do I chunk up a room? How do I really cut up like a space to actually make it so I can coordinate with my team to get in? Yeah, that's probably one of my favorites to play. Another favorite of mine to play is probably if I'm just feeling kind of like I want to focus on fragging out. I think Raze I play a lot. Yeah, where it's just like, how do I focus on fragging people? She's the easiest for me to just focus on how do I kill somebody. But yeah,
The observers told me that they asked me to tell you that they want HUD for spectator, so it looks better when they're streaming it and stuff. Is that coming as well?
It's definitely something we're working on a suite of observer upgrades right now, and a lot of it is actually targeted towards improving things as we're going through First Strike. And so right now, some of those upgrades, I don't know if exactly the observer HUD was part of that, but observer HUD I know was on the backlist. I just don't, or the backlog. It's on our list of things to do. I just don't know if it's actually something that we're putting forward in the near term, or if it's coming more towards 2021. But definitely is something that we have on there. We're actually working with a couple of professional observers who are giving us constant feedback on like all the things that they need to help improve it. And so we have a team that's working with them constantly to sort of actually go, okay, like here's the thing that you want. We're going to create it. Can we validate it? Can we test it? And then putting it out into live. Some of those features are definitely coming pretty soon, and some are coming a little bit later. So.
This question, I'm pretty sure you've answered this a million times, but when is the coach slot coming?
Coach slot, yeah. It's something we're still looking at, like in terms of the coach slot right now. We know it's totally valuable especially when you're practicing, to have the coach slot there. But it's something we're looking at in terms of how do we implement it, how do we kind of make it valuable, because just making a reserve slot and observer may not give you the thing that you want. You want to be able to communicate with your team. You want to be able to sort of do things as a coach. And so if we're creating that kind of feature, we want to make sure we understand exactly, what that feature needs.
Oh, there's a weird question, but I think it's interesting. There's a lot of people that are studying to work in a gaming company, grading games and stuff, and people want to know, how do they apply for a job in Riot, and who do they have to contact, or how does it work? I don't really know.
Yeah, so we have a job board that exists inside Riot. So if you go to the Riot website, there's a portion of it that's called Riot Careers, and Riot Careers actually has a lot of our open positions inside of there, both from the Valorant team as well as the League of Legends teams, as well as the I think the Legends of Runeterra team also posts there. Those are usually our general open positions we have there, and if you look in there, there'll be descriptions for what we're looking for, sort of qualifications. And if you feel like you look at it and you're like, oh, I could do this kind of thing, I actually do recommend you apply. Even just off the bat, even if the requirements don't look perfect for you, just apply if you're really interested in figuring it out, and we'll help you understand whether or not you're the right fit for the candidate position that we have. So, but yeah, just go to the website, go to Riot Careers. That's where you can probably get started. Getting started in general in the gaming industry, though, is of course very hard, because even when I was started, I didn't even know it was like a real job, and that was like 2 decades ago. But really, honestly, it boils down to sort of make sure that you gather the education that you need, in terms of thinking about what do I need to make the right decisions? What do I need to better understand sort of like a gaming as like sort of a development process? And then going out there and looking for companies that match your style of gaming, whatever you like to do, you should honestly just track that space and then work towards, you know, whatever they effectively do, right? So for example, if you like doing media or something of the sort, then figuring out how do you get involved in media regarding that game, in the community of the game, and then utilize that to sort of launch yourself into a position in that company is one of the best ways to do it. If you like design, you have to study the game, you know, figuring out, being able to do analysis on the game, and then sort of finding opportunities where maybe there's a position to help analyze the game or balance the game is a great way to get started in sort of gaming in that space. But really, honestly, it's very particular to the company and very particular to the thing you like to do. But yeah, there's a lot of ways to sort of get into gaming.
My last question would be, do you watch pro play? Do you watch competitive tournaments? And which one is your favorite team?
Oh man, I get asked by the favorite team by mixwell. So it's funny, each region I have a slightly different answer. I'm gonna be honest, I'm slightly biased because I'm half Japanese, so I love Absolute Jupiter. You know, Absolute Jupiter is one of my favorites. But in Europe, G2 is definitely the one that I'm watching the most. You know, but yeah, like I think there's a lot of great teams right now. T1 in America is really interesting to watch. You know, it's just with all the different places, there's so many different like teams that are out there right now, which is really fun. And Korea, probably either T1 or VS, you know, Vision Strikers are both interesting. Yeah, so what are your favorites right now besides your own team, of course?
I mean, my favorites are TSM,
TSM is interesting.
Sentinels in NA. Those two are for me the most interesting to watch. I think Genji and Envy are getting better and better. I like Tens a lot as a player. I don't think his team is that strong, but he is insane. I like Absolute Jupiter. I talk to them, I follow them. I'm pretty sure you are really happy because in Japan, Valorant is doing great. And Vision Strikers. Those are my favorite teams. And G2, of course.
Yeah.
And I don't like anyone from Europe. Thank you so much, Joe, for having me, and thank you so much for taking your time. It's not a usual thing. I come from another game. I don't think I could have ever done this. I've done a lot of things with you guys already. I've tested the game. One of the very first players that tested the game. I was talking 6 or 7 hours with the devs as well last time. 6 or 7 hours. It's insane. They spend so much time with us, and it's just I feel in good hands, you know, playing these games.
I mean, honestly,
thank you.
If we could, we'd spend all our time with you guys. You know, like it's really fun to interact with players and sort of continuously get feedback and be able to know how to improve the game and move forward with it. You know, I think most people, what they don't realize is that all of it takes a lot of time. It really does just take a lot of time. Literally coding, literally, you know, like putting all the pieces together, testing, debugging, and all that stuff. But what is useful is because of you know, players like yourself who are really helpful by giving us feedback. We're able to know where to take the game. We're able to really understand how to improve it as we go through it. So, I mean, honestly, I should be thanking you more than anything else for helping us and giving us all the feedback that we need to make the game better.
I think you guys are doing a great job, and like I said, I'm just gonna keep playing and enjoying what I'm doing, and I hope that everything goes well for you as well, and that you have a great day, and see you again.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much, and obviously, like, good luck, you know, in First Strike. You know, I think you guys are gonna do amazing things. So I'm looking forward to seeing it, and yeah, thanks for playing, and honestly, thanks for having me here. You know, I always love to get an opportunity to talk to players, so it's great.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.